The Denver Broncos improved to 1-1 after a sloppy victory over the Houston Texans. The Broncos offense win one of the sloppiest games we've seen. Cortland Sutton stepped up in a big-time way. What are some major areas that this Broncos football team needs to address? And quickly, you get that and much more in today's brand new Locked On Broncos post-game report.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe button down below so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. The Broncos improved to 1-1, winning a very sloppy, no good offensive game late in the fourth quarter against the Houston Texans. There's a lot to address in this game, Sayre. I mean, we'll talk about the Broncos offense, some of the areas of concern, clock management. How can Nathaniel Hackett improve? Because time is not going to be on his side if the Broncos continue to struggle.
It's certainly not, Cody. I like the reference to the horrible, no good, very bad day. Fortunately, just like Alexander, the Broncos are still standing at the end of the day, right? They still got a chance here. So I guess 1-1 is better than 0-2 at this point, and the Denver Broncos have to be happy about at least eking out a victory in week 2 against the Houston Texans. I don't know if it was ever really in doubt, Cody, but it was certainly looking a little bleak there at times, especially offensively. But to me, a few things stand out. We mentioned it before last week, actually. I mean, penalties, Cody. The biggest storyline from this game, in my opinion, the Broncos have been penalized at penalties that have been accepted. They've been penalized 25 times in their first 2 games, including 13 more penalties against the Houston Texans. It's just crippling. It's backbreaking. It's absolutely hard to watch, Cody, and it makes me wonder, what is the possible solution there? Because that's something that they simply can't afford as the season goes along.
I mean, you were spot on there, and I felt just frustrated from the onset, just standing up in the press box watching. Flag on the play, flag on the play, flag on the play. I mean, it was just the theme of the day. I mean, it's ugly when you have that many penalties, and this is something that needs to be addressed quickly. I know we'll spend a little bit more time on that a little bit later on here in the show here, but offensively, you were right. The Broncos offense looked sluggish after a key injury. Jerry Jeudy went down on a flea flicker play, which I love the creativity in the offensive play calling on that play to get Jerry Jeudy open, but it didn't get to him in time, and in a sense, the coverage collapsed on it. Jeudy caught the pass, landed on the ball, and it jarred out. And what we found out from Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett in a post-game press conference, we all thought it was a shoulder injury, but apparently it's a rib injury. He did not return. And from that moment forward, Sayre, the Broncos offense, they struggled to finish, which was a theme in week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks. You mentioned the penalties, but overall, the Broncos just could not get out of their own way on the offensive side of the ball. They were plagued after Jerry Jeudy's injury with a ton of drops, but also just once again, delay of game calls, not getting the play in the time, going backwards, giving up a couple of sacks. It was not a clean performance by the Broncos offense, but you know what? When they needed to come up big the most in the fourth quarter, they did, and it goes to that 3rd and 16 play. Unfortunately, the Broncos were backed up 3rd and 16, which was not a shocker considering how the theme and the flow of the game was going, but Russell Wilson delivered a beautiful 35-yard strike to Courtland Sutton, who had a monstrous day for the Broncos offense. That moved the chains, and then redemption time here for Eric Saubert. He came up with a massive touchdown to give the Broncos what would have been the game-winning touchdown in this game that gave them the lead there. It was a huge moment for the Broncos offense in the fourth quarter, but Sayre, you can't play like this against the 49ers who come to town on Sunday Night Football next week. You can't play against this, against the Las Vegas Raiders week 4, the Indianapolis Colts on Thursday Night Football week 5, the Los Angeles Chargers week 6. There's so much the Broncos need to do better, and I don't know if they're going to have enough time if they keep playing at the same pace that they are right now.
Yeah, they're going to be in big trouble if they keep playing like this. I think on the one hand, it's kind of like, is there anywhere to go but up from here, right? I mean, 25 penalties in 2 games. Like, yes, somebody pointed out to me on Twitter that yes, the final score could be a lot worse. That it could get worse in that regard. But in terms of how the Broncos have been playing, to me, Cody, I don't see as how it could get much worse than just a lack of discipline. Like you mentioned, the multiple delay of games, the having to call a timeout on a punt return where Montreal Washington just simply wasn't on the field. These are things that, like, we're as fans noticing. The play clock, literally every fan in the stadium at one point was counting down the play clock out loud, which was, I mean, it's hilarious and equal parts embarrassing, because it's like, do the Broncos really need the fans in the stands to be counting down the clock? I mean, that's just crazy. But you're right, Cody. There's positives to look at here. First of all, Saubie's redemption. That's what some are calling this. I've heard it said, Saubie's redemption. He almost caught the touchdown against Seattle, and then he makes the great catch against Houston for the score. And it was a beautiful throw from Russell Wilson. Cody, to me, there was one really bad throw from Russ in this game, and it wasn't the interception. The Cortland Sutton interception was kind of on Courtland Sutton, right? The ball hit him in the hands. He looked like, when we were watching it on TV, looked like Courtland Sutton actually made the catch, Cody. And then just at the very last second, it looked like the Texans defender, Iowa Hawkeye Christian Kirksey, by the way, snatched the ball out of his hands as he was going to the ground. So really wasn't even a bad play by Russ. And then you have all these people that are talking about, well, Russ is just cooked. And unfortunately, the Broncos dropped a ton of passes in the first half. And then you had the second half, the drive to start the second half, where Courtland Sutton, I mean, it was probably a 25-plus yard play downfield, down the middle of the field, an absolute laser from Russell Wilson that hit Courtland Sutton right in the hands, right in the chest area. So it's just unfortunate. The ball is just still not bouncing the Broncos' way. We could go on and on about all these different things, more fumbles hitting the ground and bouncing right to the team that fumbled. So it's just kind of crazy. I mean, is it not, Cody? I'm almost like spinning my wheels over here, just kind of wondering, like, what is going on? Like, are these the guys that we thought we were getting going into the season? Are they really just struggling that bad? Like, what is the issue with the mojo here? So I'm going to be interested to see how they respond. But for the time being, a 16-9 victory, that's really all that matters, because the Broncos are 1-1, and they're not. I mean, the Chargers are 1-1. The Raiders are now 0-2 after collapsing against the Cardinals. So, I guess in the final standings, that's all that matters, right? Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think one thing as well, you mentioned the fumbles. Broncos defense coming up with a massive performance here once again, holding the Texans to 234 total yards, 80 yards on the ground. Dameon Pierce had a couple of explosive runs in the game, then the Broncos buckled down, and then limiting Davis Mills in the passing game. They had a couple of medium, intermediate passes where they attacked the Broncos, but nothing explosive. And we'll obviously talk about some game balls in another time here on the episode of Lockdown Broncos. But, coming up here in just a moment, Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to dive deep into one of the keys of the game that we mentioned in our pregame show. The Broncos need to find a way to unleash their playmakers. They did with one player. How did it go with Courtland Sutton and his big day? We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's Lockdown Broncos post-game report. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. And with the Prize Picks app, you get to choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. And these players will have a projection set by Prize Picks. And you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their Prize Picks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. One of the biggest keys to the game that Sayre and I mentioned in our Lockdown Broncos pregame show was feeding your playmakers. How did the Broncos do with Courtland Sutton in a big-time day that saw Jerry Jeudy exit with an injury? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in to the Lockdown Broncos postgame report, making us your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube. We appreciate you so much to everybody in Broncos Country. Sayre, as we mentioned, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, you have to unleash them against the Houston Texans. Try to attack a young corner in Derek Stingley. The Broncos were moving the ball, as we mentioned early on with Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton. We even saw an end-around play, kind of a jet motion with Jerry Jeudy, where he was actually given the ball in this game. But then on the flea flicker play, he goes and he catches the pass, lands on it, goes out with the rib injury. From that point forward, it was the Courtland Sutton show.
It was, and it was beautiful to see. 7 receptions, 122 yards, and a couple of pass interference penalties that he drew, which don't go into the stat books, right? But obviously they happened over the course of the game. He was really getting after Derek Stingley there early on, Cody, and there was a couple of bounce back plays from Stingley. I thought at one point, remember the play where Courtland Sutton almost had a touchdown there on the back shoulder fade in the end zone against Stingley, and he just couldn't quite get his foot in bounds. At that particular point, I was thinking to myself, oh man, like they're absolutely just crushing Stingley's confidence out there. But he actually bounced back, made a couple of nice plays against Sutton. To me, Cody, this was a huge key of the game. The Broncos being able to exploit a young secondary and specifically a rookie cornerback out there, kind of get after him while he's still young, while he's still fresh into the league, right? Courtland Sutton did exactly that. And we need to talk about some of these clutch plays that he made, because you mentioned in segment 1, we talked about that big 3rd down conversion late in the game. But, I mean, another big play is that 4th and short at midfield where the Broncos made the decision, hey, they're going to put Courtland Sutton out on an island out there, and they're just going to rip him the ball and hope that he comes away with it. And he did exactly do that.
You mean to tell me that they didn't kick a 64-yard field goal on 4th and short this time? Wow, what a turnaround there. I mean,
what the heck?
That energized the Broncos, though. You mentioned that 4th down play. Like for Courtland, with Jerry going down, right, Courtland's a captain, and everybody's wondering, okay, who is going to step up? Russell Wilson went to a guy that he trusts the most, and that was Courtland. I mean, 12 targets on the game, 7 receptions, and as you mentioned, he did have that one play to open up the second half. He rose up to go get it, and Christian Kirksey just made a great play, ripping it down from him once they were coming to the ground there. That's a tough one. That's one you want back, but, for Courtland, he also took a couple of shots in this game that, I was like, oh, no, I hope he's all right, because Derek Stingley got him on the legs a couple of times on some crossing patterns, but he got right back up. But, this is, I think, a huge step forward, and this shows exactly why George Paton paid a guy like Courtland Sutton the money that he did. Now, granted, his contract is a massive bargain for the Broncos, but his leadership was on display. He went out there and he led by example, and he was a guy that was consistent. He was a guy that Russ continued to go to, boxing out Derek Stingley. I mean, he had a chip on his shoulder that entire game. Now, granted, he did have a penalty in the 3rd quarter. Even he himself said, you know what, caught up in the emotions of the game. I was really excited. We're trying to fight. We're trying to battle, and that stuff just happens there. But I think one of the things that we can take away from this game is that Courtland Sutton truly is an alpha wide receiver. He is wide receiver 1 on this team. But now there's a bigger question here, Sayre, with the injury to Jerry Jeudy. Who steps up, and what do the Broncos do at wide receiver? Because when you look at it, Courtland Sutton was the guy that got all the volume targets in this game. Other wide receivers didn't get targeted as much.
They didn't. No, it was only Tyree Cleveland that had 2 receptions beyond Courtland Sutton. Otherwise, all the other receivers just had 1 catch. So kind of crazy to think about. And when I say all the other wide receivers, Cody, I kind of say that a little bit loosely, because the Broncos' depth, and this is going to surprise you, it's not that great right now. At one point, like you tweeted during the game, it was. I mean, Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Then you draft Montrell Washington. Then you got all these other guys competing for spots in training camp. Even at tight end, you got Albert O. You draft Greg Dulcich. Well, guess what? The majority of those guys right now are not playing for the Denver Broncos. They're injured. They're hurt, and we don't know what they're going to be able to give them over the course of the rest of the season. We hope Jerry Jeudy is going to be okay. We hope KJ Hamler is going to be able to kind of figure things out and get back out on the field. We hope Greg Dulcich will be able to endure the hamstring. But Cody, the wide receiver position to me remains a major concern area. Once again, I am advocating, go out and sign Will Fuller, go out and do something at the position to get a guy that has proven that he can win at the NFL level. That's not, for lack of a better term, past his prime, or, that he doesn't contribute at as high a level anymore. I know Will Fuller's still a younger player, a former 1st-round pick. The Broncos have to do something. I mean, you watch out there with Courtland Sutton. He's not going to be able to shoulder that kind of a load every single week out there. The Broncos need help. They need somebody at receiver, especially now with Jerry Jeudy getting the shoulder injury, Cody. I feel like that's going to be maybe the final straw for George Paton to finally go out there and get some proven depth at a key position.
I'll be very intrigued to see what the Broncos decide to do this week. Obviously, Kendall Hinton was elevated on game day. Jalen Virgil inactive. I think the Broncos, I get he's a rookie. but he made the 53-man roster. You have to put him out there, and you have to give him a chance to go out and show that he belongs there, because the Broncos had several rookies step up as well, including rookie cornerback Damari Mathis after a key injury to Patrick Surtain. We'll talk about that a little bit coming up here in just a moment. But, I do want to mention Montreal Washington. I came away very impressed with Montreal here in his second game. Now, granted, his first game was some jitters, but I thought in the punt return game, he demonstrated exactly why the Broncos drafted him initially. And I think that he can showcase now, like if Jerry's going to miss any extended period of time, which we're going to wait a further update from Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit more on Monday morning regarding his status and whether or not he'll be able to go against San Francisco. Montreal Washington almost hauled in a touchdown on the left side on a beautiful play. Got one foot in, couldn't get the other one in, but he caught a tough pass there. So I think there's things that you can build on there. But as you mentioned early on in this game, after Jerry's injury, the Broncos struggled with a few drops. But Eric Saubert coming up big in the fourth quarter with the game-winning touchdown catch. Big-time redemption for Eric Saubert. But Broncos country, there is a lot that this team, there's a lot that the offense and the coaching staff have to clean up if they want to have the ability to sustain and stack some wins, especially with some tougher teams that they're going to be facing in the next couple of weeks. What do the Broncos need to address? We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Turo, the sponsor of today's episode of Locked On Broncos post-game report. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace, and with Turo, you can book any car that you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday, and you can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. Test drive that brand new electric vehicle that you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. And many Turo hosts can even deliver the car directly to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Penalties, game management, clock management, and red zone efficiency are just some of the Broncos' problems they need to address going forward if they hope to have a successful season. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning into the Locked On Broncos post-game report. The Broncos improved to 1-1 after a 16-9 victory in Power Field at Mile High over the Houston Texans. But with a victory, right, everyone says a win is a win. But there's ugly wins as well, and there's things that you can learn about yourself, even in an ugly win, that you can go back and say, hey, you know what? This is an issue despite the win. A win is nice, but it doesn't always clear up the blemishes that you have as a football team. And once again, Sayre, I think that this is the thing with a rookie head coach, young coaching staff. We're seeing a lot of those inexperiences impact the Broncos on game day, which is a little bit of a concern.
We are seeing it, Cody, and I think a lot of fans that really were disappointed by the way that Vic Fangio handled game management, clock management, they're obviously having a very quick trigger for Nathaniel Hackett, because the same kind of stuff that we saw from Vic Fangio just simply isn't going to be tolerated by this fan base. We already talked about the fact that they're literally calling out the seconds as they're ticking down from the play clock because the Broncos had multiple delay of game penalties once again. And in this game, it actually cost them 3 points because they were about to kick a field goal and they didn't get the field goal unit out there in time. And then they ended up having to punt the ball away. So like this isn't just a small issue. This isn't it's the end of the first half and we want to put the pedal to the metal and score 30 points in the first half. And we're upset that the coach isn't putting his foot on the throat. No, these are serious issues that are costing the Broncos big time in these games, and nearly against the Houston Texans. I mean, it could have been a loss, Cody. Let's just call it what it is. I mean, it was a close win for the Denver Broncos. It didn't really feel like they were ever in doubt, but at the same time, Houston could have easily at any point taken and run away with one of these opportunities. The offense gave them plenty. So to me, the game management and the clock management and the just the way that Nathaniel Hackett has been kind of going about things, like you have to ask the question, and I'm not trying to overreact. I'm not, you don't see any blood on my face. There's no knee jerk here, but I'm questioning whether or not, I mean, should he be calling plays and managing the game at the same time, or who is helping him with those things? I think it's a fair question to ask after 2 games with these big issues that have come up.
I will say one thing too about the fans counting out. I kind of like it. How come this isn't like a standard in the NFL, right? If you go to an NBA game, when the shot clock is winding down, fans are counting. Why isn't this a standard practice in the National Football League? I mean, Granted, the Broncos have to be better, and I think it's nice to get a little bit of assist from the fans, but this is just heads-up stuff. This is just, whatever you're getting up in the box, whatever's being communicated to you, it's got to be faster, it's got to be quicker, and Hackett said in his post-game press conference it has to be better, and it falls on him. But Broncos fans, look, hey, here's the deal. I see a lot of people saying the Broncos need to fire Nathaniel Hackett after 2 games. I think that's absolutely wild. I think it's crazy. Now, granted, what we knew coming into this season, the Broncos have a rookie head coach, a first-time head coach, and a lot of inexperienced coaches. And this, I think, is one of the pitfalls we're going to see. Now, granted, it's early on, and I think that the Broncos can correct these mistakes, but Sayre, this fan base isn't going to be patient enough to deal with the same kind of things week in and week out, and rightfully so. I mean, granted, what they see, the expectation is winning football. I do think we need to give a little bit of breathing room to the coaching staff, but not a lot, right? Not a lot of room left for error at this point, because some of these issues 2 weeks into the season, you can't make this mistake against the San Francisco 49ers, who lost Trey Lance for the year, but they have Jimmy G, and they rolled to a win against the Seattle Seahawks. Then you have a Week 4 matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders, who, despite them being 0-2, they're a tough opponent. You can't make mistakes against teams like that. And then you have the Colts Thursday Night Football, short turnaround, and then the Chargers on Monday Night Football, who are a really good team right now in the AFC West. So the Broncos and this coaching staff's room for error is kind of growing a little bit thinner. The leash is getting a little bit shorter, but I don't think it's to the point where the Broncos should just, okay, hey, we're going to fire a brand new head coach. Let him go through the growing pains, but I agree, Sayre. There has to be something that changes between what's happening in the box, how it's getting communicated down to the coaching staff in a timely manner, because this cannot continue to impact the Broncos, and if it does, it's going to create a lot of issues. And I think a lot of fans were frustrated as well that the Broncos stopped running the football. Javonte Williams was averaging 6.6 yards per carry and was an absolute hog in between the tackles, keeping his feet churning as well. He had a big game. But I think there was a 3rd and 2 play that Broncos fans were really wondering what the heck is going on. Now, luckily, they converted it with Courtland Sutton catching it on 4th and 2 there. But they motioned Andrew Beck, gave him the ball, and it looked like an option play where he was supposed to pitch it to Javonte, but there was no one there. The Texans played it really good defensively, and everyone's like, what kind of play call was that? I know play calling is definitely something that's going to be there. But even like wide receiver depth, I know we addressed that. Penalties are a huge problem. They can't continue to do that. But let's talk about one of the key injuries to a key defensive player that we don't know what the outlook is yet. Patrick Surtain going out with a shoulder injury. He didn't go straight to the locker room, though. He was on the sideline for quite a bit. Then he went back to the locker room, did not return. Thrust Damari Mathis into the spotlight a little bit. Initially, I thought he did a good job. I asked Hackett after the game what he thought of Damari Mathis, and he said, for Damari, the moment was not too big for him, and he stepped up as a rookie, and he did exactly what the team needed him to do. And I know we'll touch on Damari Mathis a little bit later on in another episode of Lockdown Broncos here this week. But your initial thoughts on that before we get out on today's Lockdown Broncos post-game report.
Yeah, Damari Mathis with a really nice play coming up in run support there. Or was it a run after the catch? It's hard for me to remember exactly, Cody, but I mean, he made a nice stick, first down saving tackle, and he was also very good in coverage. Aside from the one play, Brandon Cooks kind of got a little he got a little open there in the end zone, but he dropped the pass. I think Damari Mathis played with confidence. I thought he did a really great job out there. You come away from a game like that thinking, okay, we kind of buy into this guy as a future starter, as we kind of thought and hoped that he could be at one point. So certainly don't want to see Pat Surtain go down, but it's also a very good experience for the rookie Damari Mathis to get out there, especially against a player like Brandon Cooks, one of the more underrated receivers in the game.
Broncos country, let us know your thoughts down below. The Broncos improved to 1-1 after a 16-9 victory against the Houston Texans. A lot of things that this team needs to clean up. Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in. Make it Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. Monday morning, you get a special Lockdown Broncos episode where we talk about game balls against the Houston Texans. Which players on offense, defense, and special teams stood out. Check that out tomorrow morning for your morning drive to work. The Lockdown Broncos podcast.